Assalamualaikum, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Mana yang lain ah? Tolong panggil yang lain cepat masuk ah. Kamu ada 88, sekarang baru 40 orang sahaja nih, baru half, not even half of the numbers. Before we start, saya mau tanya confirmation, kita sekarang chapter number 5 kan? Last time we stopped at chapter number 4, kan? Can anyone respond?
Yes, sir.
Right, so for this morning, we will continue with chapter number 5. Let's wait for another 2 minutes. If the rest masih lagi lambat masuk, then we can just start lah. Oke, juga kamu punya midterm test.
Bolehlah, sir.
Boleh sekolah.
Mungkin boleh.
Confident. Oke lah itu. Nanti kamu sepatutnya submit your assignment this week kan?
Yes, sir.
So week 14 lah baru ada OGA. Kamu punya midterm test ada sudah result date. Dia generate automatic kan dari YouFuture. Jadi any issues berkenaan dengan assignment kamu, ada masalah? Tidak, semua oke.
Tinggal mau kasih siap lagi, sir.
Memang tinggal masih siap. Dona lah tuh.
Yes, sir.
Right, so kalau tidak apa-apa, dan kita start lah ya. Oke ya, I think it's been a month kan, kita last jumpa. Selalu cuti di ngam-ngam hari Senin. And then the past 2 weeks pula saya attend workshop. I'm not in campus for 2 weeks. Jadi itu yang jadi isu lah. But it's okay, we will try to catch up with the syllabus. If we cannot finish it by week 14, then we still have some class to replace, right? Kita masih lagi ada beberapa kelas yang kita boleh ganti. Okay. So for this week, we will continue with chapter number 5. About international security and also power. So the boys, yang lelaki-laki itu kalau boleh buka kamera, bukalah macam Zahran bukan pakai tudung pun, bukalah Zahran, kamu punya kamera. Yang lain pun juga ya. So saya rasa macam ada kawan lah bercakap instead of saya tengok slides saja ya. Okay, so for chapter number 5, it's about international security and power. Do you guys have this slide? Tiada? Anda apalah, kamu tengoklah dulu ya. Lepas habis kelas, saya kasih kamu slide nih. So at least kamu tengok, focus on the lecture first ya. International security and power. And this is these are the content that we will discuss in this chapter. For instance, we will look at the concept of power, the contemporary theory of power, power disparity, bargaining, leverage, BOP, historical background, and alliances, all of which centered around the idea of power disparities. Okay. Why do we need to understand power in international relations? Is because at the end of the day, it goes back to the level of power that you have over the others. Okay. In order for you to survive, in order for you to secure your national interest, it all goes down to how much power that you accumulated to attain that goals. Again, the fundamental of international relation is national interest, right? So that's why power is important. So international security, meaning definition and explanation. Let's look at the definition of power. Yeah. So this was an excerpt from Morgenthau, a book, The Politic Among Nations. We have discussed briefly about this book in the previous chapter, yeah, The Politic Among Nations, which was published in 1948, in which Morgenthau, when explaining about power, he touched on three main components: anarchy, sovereignty, and hegemony. Okay, so how do power related to these three components? First of all, as assumed by realists, Morgenthau is a realist scholar. Yeah, as assumed in realism, politics operates in an anarchy system. Anarchy means there is no one superior power to oversee the operation of all the states. So, meaning to say that when everyone is assumed are assumed as of equal status, that's when power struggle happen. Okay, so anarki maksudnya tidak ada kuasa atas daripada negara berdaulat. Negara berdaulat adalah level paling atas sudah. Jadi berlaku perebutan kuasa. Sovereignty means the respect to one state's right to administer their own territory. Okay, so that's sovereignty, and hegemony means the power. Okay, the power to overrule any decision, the power to make decision unilaterally. Okay, so these three components are what makes up these security issues, because at the end of the day, when you get intel in a conflict with other countries, dia akan ada berlaku unsur-unsur security dilemma yang mana kamu tidak tahu apa yang negara lain akan buat kepada kamu. So it creates doubt and makes you become more cautious. So in response to that, you increase your own military. That's how unrest happen. Jadi ketiga-tiga ini adalah satu komponen utama yang mewujudkan pelbagai isu-isu spillover yang lain, right? So that's the most crucial aspect of international relations due to the past experience. This was very evident during the World War One, World War Two, 30 Years War, and all the other significant events from the past that shape the political climate that we have today. Okay. So what is power actually? Yeah? Definition of power is an enabling factor in interaction between international actors. So without power, an actor cannot bargain well or turn event in its own favor. So when you operate in an anarchy system, no superior power, no international police, you have to depend on diplomacy, foreign policy to negotiate between you and also the other competing parties to get your national interest. So in that negotiation process, you have to somewhat have some leverage over your other competitors. So what kind of leverage? Usually we measure your leverage in terms of power. Okay, so bila kamu ada power, lebih mudah untuk kamu convince or even impose your will on the other towards the other parties. Kalau kamu tidak ada power, kamulah yang akan ditekan. Kalau kamu ada power, kamu yang tekan mereka. Then power tu, how do we measure power? Is it purely based on military power? No. Okay, there are many sources of power in which we will discuss later. So it's about bargaining, negotiation process. Okay, where power become the enabling factor. That could be your leverage over the other competing parties. So power is the ability of an actor on the international stage to use tangible and intangible resource and assets in such a way as to turn the outcome of international event in one favor. Okay, so the first keyword here, ability. Okay, so that's the point, the first point from this definition. Just like what I explained just now, it's the enabling factor. A second, it explained about the source of power. It can be tangible, which means something that you can see, like military power, nuclear power, and whatnot. And intangible resources mostly comes from cognitive, okay, cognitive ataupun constructivism, from idea, for instance culture, okay, sports and whatnot, in which you try to influence the other party through subtle way yang dia tidak nampak keras tapi sebenarnya dia mempengaruhi kamu, okay. And the last one, the last apa yang kena kasih highlight tu adalah the objective output from the process, the desired output from the process, which is we try to turn the outcome of international event in our favor. So that's the whole point of entering any negotiation. Kamu tidak akan enter any negotiation knowing that you will lose in the negotiation process. Kamu masuk sebarang perbincangan dengan harapan kamu dapat menjadikan itu platform untuk dapatkan national interest kamu. Okay, so these are the three idea embed in this definition, right? And then concept of power. If you have any question, just raise your hand or ask right away ya. Takut nanti kamu tidak faham. Okay, yang lelaki bukalah kamera tu ya. So ability to get another actor to do what it would not have done. Example, power to influence. Okay, this is a realist perspective, which means that you can see two different scenario where it helps you to understand how power influence the process. Okay, kalau kamu masuk negotiation tu, satu perbincangan tanpa power, negara yang satu lain tu tidak akan buat apa yang kamu mau, tapi kalau kamu masuk dengan power, dia akan buat apa yang kamu mau. Maksudnya power tu you basically corner them to do as you will because of their fear on your power. Okay, so itu sebab dia. Ability to influence is based on the characteristic or possession of the states. Okay, territory, income level, armed force, population, all of which adalah tangible sources of power. So ini adalah how you intimidate other country based on these tangible sources of power. Adakah small states dare to challenge China, knowing that China is the most populous country in the world? No, because China, having that kind of resources, can recruit their population to be forced military. Whereas if, let's say, for small states like Brunei, okay, they would not dare to challenge China due to the fact that they know China have more human resources to be capitalized in the military sector compared to Brunei. Okay, so itu in terms of territory, in terms of income level, China also the big economic power right now. Okay, if let's say we mess with that, then they can impose economic sanction, for instance, that could hamper the development of a particular country that depends to the import-export transaction with China. The same goes for armed forces. Adakah Malaysia berani dengan, for instance, United States, knowing that United States have nuclear power, they have technology, they have all sorts of technology to enhance their military capability? Of course not, right? So that's some of the example, yeah. And then this one explain about the sources of power that I mentioned just now, yeah. Hard power and soft power. So hard power is the exercise of influence through coercion, relying on tactics like military force payment and economic sanction. Okay, coercion maksudnya memaksa secara kasar lah. Okay, so hard power ni basically goes back to the fundamental idea about power as suggested by realists, in which power comes from military. Okay, so for instance, military, how you use your military to annex other country, or how you use your military to cause war with other country, right? Of course, when you create war, that will subsequently lead to big numbers of casualty. So that means it falls under the category of coercion. Okay, payment, for instance, economic sanction, all of which tangible power, hard power. Whereas for soft power, use attraction, persuasion to change mind and influence behavior. So hard power more on the realist uh, uh, perspective, whereas soft power more on the liberalist and constructivist. Okay, kenapa I said hard power lebih kepada realis? Sebab realis cakap untuk dapatkan national interest, kepentingan nasional, kena guna military. Soft power pula cakap source include culture, political values and positive global engagement. Iaitu, for instance, foreign policy where we use our diplomacy game, our statesman, craftship, diplomats, attache and whatnot, to make sure that we can capitalize on the existing diplomatic relationship untuk menjadikan mereka tu lebih rapat dengan kita dan mengikut kemahuan kita. Okay, so for instance yang paling mudah sekarang K-pop lah ya. K-pop tu dijadikan satu foreign policy tools by Korea to influence other country. Right now, the most powerful instrument of a Korean politic is their K-pop policy. Okay, so that's one example of culture soft power. Okay, and then political values, for instance, the introduction of democracy. Okay, so when we talk about democracy, our mind will right away think of the Western power. So that's soft power. That's why people said that even though we already gained our independence, but we still somehow look at the Western continent as more superior than us here in Asia because of these political values. Okay, we have this perception that the Western country adopt more pure type of democracy as compared to us. Jadi itu adalah soft power, dia sudah di otak. Okay, yaitu constructivism and positive global engagement, right? So those are some example of soft power and hard power. But at the end of the day, the desired output, the goals is to achieve national interest. Okay, regardless of whether you use hard power or soft power, still fokusnya adalah sebenarnya untuk mencapai kepentingan nasional, right? So power of idea, the ability to maximize the influence of capability through a psychological process, human right advocacy. Okay, so prior to this, especially before uh, um, uh, uh, especially during the Cold War, World War One, World War Two, they never really see human rights as an important values to uphold. Yeah, so pada Cold War, pada World War One, World War Two, human rights never in the discussion anyway. Yeah, tapi after Cold War, uh, the mushrooming of all these human rights defenders establishing their presence in individual states. Okay, for instance, in our country, kita ada Suhakam, Suharam, ya, yang mana Suhakam, for instance, dorang adalah under di Kementerian uh, Pejabat Perdana Menteri, ya, yang mana mereka adalah NGO human rights defender utama di Malaysia. Okay, so human rights advocacy ini berkenaan dengan right to education, right to citizenship, right to exercise religious and whatnot. Yang mana sebelum tu tidak pun diendahkan, orang dah peduli pun pasal human rights ni. But post Cold War, orang start to spread this idea that human right advocacy atau human right needs to be adhered, needs to be fulfilled. Okay, so we can no longer harass women, we can no longer deny citizenship. We must in any form give them their rights, okay, regardless of whether they pose threat to our national sovereignty or not. So that's why human right ni a little bit tricky in the sense that you really need to balance between giving human right and your national security. Okay, that's what you can see right now in our country in regards to stateless issue, in regards to citizenship. Yang just apa? I think the end of last year or early this year, being hotly debated, okay, about the rights of children born overseas to Malaysian mother. Right. So that's another example of human rights advocacy in which only started post the Cold War. Okay, because after the Cold War, the democracy came, the democracy bloc emerged as the winner. So human rights actually embedded under the democracy value. So after their ideology become dominance, that's when human rights started to be spread to all country, right? Jadi bila semua negara sudah mengamalkan human right, it creates standard in our mind yang sebenarnya saya tidak boleh menafikan dia punya citizenship. Jadi dia sudah dalam kepala kita sudah jadi satu bentuk standard. Sedangkan itu adalah idea that we construct in our mind. Kalau kita tidak nampak human right itu sebagai satu kemestian, dan kita boleh je deny statelessness, deny citizenship and whatnot. Tapi sebabkan dia menjadi satu norma antara bangsa, norma antarabangsa berlaku apabila semua orang berfikiran sama. Jadi barulah dia menjadi satu construction of idea which later become the international norm. Okay? So far, can you follow me? Bolehkah?
Boleh, sir.
Yang lain, okay. Iqbal,
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
right, So, fungibility of power, the ability to balance tangible and intangible power. So, yang soft power tu sama kan dengan soft diplomacy. Okay, soft power tu sebenarnya bukan juga soft diplomacy, memang diplomasi saja tu. Okay, soft power tu memang menggunakan diplomasi, culture diplomasi, all sort of diplomacy falls under the heading of soft power. Okay, because soft diplomacy ni another tools that we use to attend national interest. Okay, because previously we always get intel in war, but post Cold War there are no longer a big scale war happen in the international relation. So with the absence of big scale war, we are left with no choice but to use diplomacy as means for us to attend our national interest. Okay. Right. Hope that answered your question. Yeah. So for tangible, you can see there sources of tangible power, population, military, economy, national resources, and population lagi. Okay, redundant tu ya. So economy, for instance, you might be wondering how economy can become sources of power. Again, as you become more dominant in the economic sector, other states started to rely more, okay, on you. So if let's say you suddenly cut your supplies to that particular country, macam mana dorang mau capai dorang punya supply and demand? Jadi dia akan menyebabkan ketidakstabilan di peringkat domestik. Okay, so that become an opportunity for political instability in that country. So in order for us to maintain the existing political stability, we need to rely with one another. Jadi it somehow create a leverage to those yang mempunyai kuasa ekonomi. Okay, for instance, like how China increased the investment in Malaysia especially during Najib Razak era. If let's say, because previously Najib Razak very friendly, dia guna friendly foreign policy when it comes to economic transaction with China, and that creates some sort of dissatisfaction, especially grassroots level and also the opposite camp, the opposition bloc. Jadi apa yang berlaku adalah tiba-tiba kita mengurangkan kerjasama ekonomi dengan China, sebabkan Najib cuba untuk mengekalkan dia punya political legitimacy. Look at what happened to our country. Banyak projek-projek yang tergendala, bangunan-bangunan yang siap setengah jalan, kekurangan peluang pekerjaan, and what not. And it also become one reason to the collapse of his administration, his government at that time. Okay, not to say that that's the correct decision to topple him down. No, it's just that there will always be pro and cons to it. Whether you want to see it from the economic perspective or the national security perspective and whatnot. Because if you want to see it from the national security perspective, okay, that power give opportunity for China to influence our decision making, because knowing that we depends a lot dengan dorang punya ekonomi. Let's say we allow them to continue to invest in our country. Jadi semakin kita bergantung dengan dorang, semakin kita terpaksa ikuti dorang apa yang dorang cakap. So that becomes soft diplomacy pula pada waktu itu. Yang mana kami ada kuasa ekonomi, kami menyalurkan banyak bahan-bahan mentah, projek-projek kontrak yang kami ada dengan kamu. Kalau kamu tidak ikut cakap kami stop semua. Jadi the government need to follow their order as well. Jadi there will always be pro and cons to it. But coming back to our main discussion in regards to power, that's how the leverage created out of the economic power, right? The same goes for intangible, like political support. Okay, some political parties, they have very good relationship with foreign elements, outside actors. So they can provide them with political support, especially the Middle Eastern country. They have their own preference in regards to political parties in Malaysia. The same goes for Australia, especially. They are very good with a friend of Anwar Ibrahim, for instance, Australia, yeah, in terms of education. Okay, because we want to create more M40 group. With the birth of M40 community, we can create a more democratic country. The same goes for culture and tradition. It's about identity. Right now, we can see that with the dominance of a K-pop culture in our country, slowly, gradually, it started to erode, yeah, our very own identity. People conform more to K-pop identity as compared to the Malaysian identity, right? We have a lot of unique identity in our country, but people started to identify themselves more with the Korean culture, suddenly speaking Korean out of nowhere and whatnot, right? It's okay, I'm not saying that that's not tidak boleh lah, tapi there must be some limitation border to yang mana you still have to be proud to identify yourself with your very own culture, right? If not, it will create some sort of identity confusion. Okay, patriotism and nationalism. Okay, patriotism and nationalism, we have a lot of policy that focus on these issues, like history subject being taught in high school, yeah, primary school, to make sure that these kids ataupun young adults lah juga ya in university, they ada patriotism and nationalism ni. Sebab apa? Sebab kalau tidak ada patriotism, nationalism in a country, that's when our states become at the very vulnerable position lah, right? So model of the element of state power in international relation, we have several sources of power being mentioned there: geography, national resources, population. Okay, natural resources of a state's power are enhanced, modified, or constrained by tangible sources of power like industrial development, access to resource, whereas for intangible source of power like national image, public support, and leadership, right? So this one, clear cut, so self-explanatory, yeah? And then contemporary theory, there are 4 types of power according to social constructivists, okay? We have power over, Okay, domination and relativity of power. We have a structural power, power within state, institutional power, power within IOs, and productive power, power of ideas. Okay, so ini adalah the main type of power as assumed in social constructivism lah. Again, it goes back to the construction of idea. Okay, domination and relativity of power, ability to actualize objective, ability to development personal concisization and construct on reality, and ability to cooperate, tolerate, embrace difference, and benefit from each other. Okay, so these are the explanation to the four type of power, right? So that one you can read later. And then power disparity. Power is a relative concept. Okay, so at the end of the day, it goes back to the power disparity. Okay, we cannot no way all country will have accumulate same level of power. There will always be disparity in regards to power. Okay, so that very disparity is what create the power struggle. States have power in relation to other states. So this is the basic concept of power. Okay, it's about the power relationship between or among states. And in that relationship, there must be someone yang ada lebih banyak power daripada negara-negara yang lain. So how do you measure? What are the measuring stick that we use to gauge the power of an individual states? For instance, you can look at the power disparity from the perspective of economy, where you use GNP and GDP, gross domestic product. Yeah, within states, example, for instance, strength of political parties, number of seats, and voting. You can look at the statistic from the number of seats and voting, all of which, if all of this information are made public. So it's easy to access so that the public actually knows which parties are stronger than the others. Okay, state power is a mix of many aspects, example, tangible and intangible, right? And then bargaining. So sekarang ni kita sudah masuk kepada konsep-konsep utama di dalam power. First, yang paling kita perlu tahu adalah berkenaan power disparity. Kedua adalah power disparity ini sebenarnya penting di dalam bargaining process. So what is bargaining? The exercise of power involves two or more parties, each trying to influence the other more than it is itself influenced, because it's a continuous cycle. Ya, bargaining ni adalah continuous cycle yang tidak akan berhenti. Even after you reach a consensus, maybe 10 years, 20 years from now, they will attempt to negotiate again, renegotiate again. Okay, so it's about how you maintain your position. It's about how you make sure that you are the one who influence the other party, as opposed to they are the one that influence you. Okay, bargaining can be defined as tacit or direct communication in an attempt to reach agreement on an exchange of value, tangible or intangible item that one or both parties values. Okay, whenever you enter into bargaining process, negotiation process, you bring with you something, apalah, kamu bawa lah apa-apa yang kamu persetujui on table. Okay, so basically a lot at stake when you do the negotiation process. What's on table are at stake depending on the result of the negotiation process. Jadi kamu bila memasuki apa-apa bentuk perundingan, kamu bawa bersama kamu sesuatu kepentingan dan letakkan di atas meja perbincangan itu. Jadi bergantung kepada siapa yang berjaya mempengaruhi parti yang lain akan mendapatkan apa yang ada di meja yang kamu offer tu, right? And then bargaining includes both indirect move and explicit negotiation. Okay, so sometimes it does not only depends on what being discussed in the negotiation table, but also the development that happen outside. Okay, jadi ada juga perkara-perkara di luar perbincangan itu yang boleh mempengaruhi apa berlaku di dalamnya. For instance, political instability, maybe it's a discussion between Malaysia and Indonesia. But you also need to consider the role of ASEAN as a regional bodies, the role of neighboring countries, how they welcome the result of your negotiation. Okay, if let's say it does not well received by the neighboring countries, then you need to negotiate again, because it requires commitment from all parties to make it happen, to make it work. Bargaining process has two or more participants and sometimes a mediator. Okay, so mediator, when you are being appointed as mediator, you need to come in with neutral stance. Okay, and it's not easy to be appointed as a mediator. You must get the trust from the competing parties before you are allowed to enter into negotiation process as a mediator. Bukan semua negara ini mendapat kepercayaan daripada parti-parti yang terlibat dalam perbincangan itu. Oke, jadi untuk menjadi mediator perlulah satu negara yang dipersetujui bersama oleh semua partisipan dalam perbincangan tersebut. Participants bring different means of leverage to bargaining process. Maybe one country economic power, another country military power, other country alliances. Jadi ada banyak bentuk leverage yang boleh dipertimbangkan, right? Leverage derived from power capability that allows one actor to influence the other to reach agreement more favorable to the first actor's interest. Okay. So leverage may operate on any three dimensions of power. The first one, the promise of positive sanction. Okay, so this one goes down to the stick and carrot. Okay, which means for you to convince the other party to accept your decision, you offer them something in return. Okay, so knowing that you can also benefit from such arrangement, barulah kamu akan setuju. Okay, dia menjadi pull factor lah for you to agree with the will of the other parties. Okay, it goes back to the positive sum game lah. Okay, the threat of negative sanction. This one adalah carrot. The first point is carrot. Second point is stick, which means that you threaten them. Okay, of possible consequences if they oppose your decision, if they oppose your will. Okay, for instance, maybe you come into the negotiation with military capability that way more greater than the other participant. So suddenly they oppose your will. Then you can threaten them to annex their territory, as what happened in Myanmar. Okay, when Vietnam proposed the idea of ASEAN communist parties, which involve Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, only Laos accept the offer, and Cambodia decided to against the offer. Jadi what Vietnam did was they annexed Cambodia at that time. So that's how a threat of negative sanction can occur in the negotiation process. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be a military intervention. Maybe it can also be in terms of economy. If let's say it's between Malaysia and China, for instance, China may take economic sanction towards Malaysia if let's say they do not agree with what we decided, right? And appeal to the other feelings of love, friendship, sympathy, or respect for oneself. This one usually happen when you have good diplomatic relationship with that country. For instance, during Najib and Tun Razak era, they have what we deem as special relationship between Malaysia and China, because Tun Razak used to be the first Prime Minister of ASEAN country that established diplomatic relationship with China. So that have a very long-lasting effect. Sampaikan ke peringkat anaknya. Okay, never in our country's history one sovereign states decided to give the mother of the prime minister. Okay, dia bagi hadiah kepada ibu si Najib Razak. Tidak pernah berlaku dalam sejarah kita mana-mana pemimpin negara lain memberi hadiah kepada ahli keluarga pemimpin negara kita. Tidak pernah, ya. So that's why we usually deem the relationship during Tun Razak and Najib Razak era with China sebagai a special relationship. Okay. Bargaining usually takes place formally, usually at a table with back and forth dialogue called negotiation. Okay, so contohnya yang Korean summit, ya, between North Korea and South Korea, and then the mediator is United States. Of course, tidak berjaya lah, but still it's a bargaining process that takes place at that time. It took about 2 years, right? If I'm not mistaken, sebelum dia collapse, ya. Salah satu sebab dia juga adalah shift of administration, leadership in United States, from Donald Trump to Biden. Okay. Balance of power is a state of stability between competing forces. So this is a continuation, expanded version of power struggle, because when there is an issue, there must be a solution. So in this case, the proposed solution is balance of power, as means for us to address the power disparity issue. Balance of power is a state of stability between competing forces. In international relation, it refers to equilibrium among countries or alliances to prevent any one entity from becoming too strong and thus gaining the ability to enforce its will upon the others. Okay, so coming back to the power disparity, their tendency for power disparity berlaku very big, and it will lead to power struggle. Jadi, there will always be conflict. There will always be political instability that occurs at the international stage. So that's the issue. Now, how do we address the issue? Okay, so for realists, they propose the idea of balance of power, in which it discuss the natural responses from the state whenever political climate starting to be, starting to get worse. Yeah, so the idea lies in the natural responses among the states to form alliances to make sure that there's no one country creates unilateral structure. Okay, creates a unipolar structure. Right. So this proportionate power, disparity of power, will lead to balance of power, right? So what is balance of power? A rule to manage international system or international society. The general concept to balance of power of many, okay, of one or many states' power. Process that counterbalancing coalition, repeatedly found in history to prevent one state from conquering an entire region. So this was an excerpt from a Gentao book, yeah, Nation. Balance of power argues that such counterbalance secure regularly to stability of international system. So without balance of power, then our international system will be in a continuous international chaos states. Yeah. Whereas with balance of power, it creates world order. Okay. So with balance of power, we know that we have a superior power to oversee the political behavior of states that operate in the international system. But in the absence of balance of power, people become free to do whatever they like. So that creates international chaos. So that's how balance of power comes into the equation, right? So these are the variation of balance of power. First, equilibrium resulting from equal distribution of power among nation states. So how do this equal distribution of power happen? it does not necessarily have to be a balance of power between two parties. Okay, it can also become balance of power between camps. Okay, for instance, during the Cold War, okay, bukannya hanya ada dua negara, tapi ada dua camp yang mana mereka mewujudkan pakatan, alliances to increase their power to make sure that they can match the other camp power. Okay, so bila berlaku ada dua blok yang mempunyai pengaruh dan kuasa yang sama, mereka menjadi berhati-hati dan tidak melakukan perkara dengan sembarangan. That's how political stability can be secured. But if, let's say, there is no balance of power, Malaysia become the only superpower in the international politics, then Malaysia are free to do whatever that we like. For instance, maybe kita cakap nuklear negara tu, serang negara ni. It's go against your decision. So that's the danger of unipolar structure. Okay, that's why according to realist, macam mana pun dia cakap, respon secara semula jadi daripada negara-negara lain adalah mereka tidak akan membenarkan sesebuah negara itu menjadi negara hegemoni, right? Equilibrium resulting from unequal distribution of power among nation states. Okay, so ini adalah berkenaan dengan pembentukan alliances tu untuk mewujudkan distribution of power sebenar. Okay, so it started off from unequal distribution of power, but through alliances, they match the power of the opposing camp. Okay, equilibrium resulting from dominance one nation states. Okay, so ini berkenaan dengan unipolar structure. Kalau hanya satu negara yang menjadi negara hegemon, it become dominance one nation state. Tapi kalau kita ada dua, dia akan menjadi bipolar, atau kalau kita ada lebih dari dua, dia akan jadi multipolar. Okay, a system providing for relative stability and peace, a system characterized by instability and war. Okay, so ini bukan not so much on the variation, but more on the component that what makes a balance of power works in securing political stability, right? But balance of power fails under several circumstances. For instance, one or more great power attempt to dominate, which means when we already established balance of power, but suddenly one party decided to create dominance. For example, Napoleon Bonaparte from 1804 to 1815 and Adolf Hitler, 1934-1945. Okay, so First World War, Second World War, right? Napoleon Bonaparte during the French Revolution. Okay, the great power dissatisfied with the internal legitimacy of government of others. For example, the war on terror by United States against Saddam Hussein. The same goes in the case of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Okay, both case which United States decided to murder this political leader. Okay, which later creates another big scale conflict in terms of Arab Spring. Okay, untuk Muammar Gaddafi lah. Untuk Saddam Hussein, war on terror, Muammar Gaddafi, Arab Spring lah. That's how war erupted lah. So balance of power fell when war erupted, right? Four prerequisite of balance of power. Okay, apa perkara-perkara yang perlu ada untuk balance of power ini berlaku? Yang pertama adalah a multiplicity of sovereign political actor. Okay, right now we have a lot of sovereign country. So the first criteria, check the absence of a single centralized, legitimate, and strong authority over these sovereign states. Right now we have unipolar structure actually, yaitu United States, but we also have rising power, for instance Russia and also China. So even though we still operates in the unipolar structure, but United States does not have the courage to act as they will, because they know that Russia and China and several other countries like India, German, have the capacity to balance against them. Okay, so second point check as well. Then second point number two, relatively unequal distribution among the political actor that make up this system. This permit the differentiation of states into at least three categories: great power, intermediate power, and small power. So where do you guys think Malaysia in? Intermediate power, small power, great power? Kamu rasa Malaysia di mana? Guys, kamu rasa Malaysia di mana satu? Great power, intermediate power, small power?
Small.
Small. Intermediate. So most of the time we are being considered as intermediate power lah, small and intermediate power. We have different views from scholars when labeling our country's power in the international system. But most evidently, in terms of intermediate power, was during Tun Mahathir era, di ASEAN Tiger kan, kita punya, they dubbed us as the ASEAN Tiger at that time because of our influence in the OIC organization and ASEAN organization. Okay, it was just recently that people started to look at Malaysia as a small state power because of the political instability that happened in our country. Okay, but we always go back and forth between intermediate power and small power, right? But we never was a great power lah. And continuous but controlled competition, conflict among sovereign political actors for what are perceived as scarce resources. Okay, so right now we have free market, laissez-faire. Okay, in which almost all market open for everyone to enter. Okay, however, it's still under a control system where the host country still impose government intervention. Okay, so the third point also check. Maksudnya di setiap negara nih, biarpun orang mengamalkan perdagangan bebas, tapi tidaklah sebebas semacam yang Adam Smith cakap tuh, yaitu total independence from any kind of interference from the government in the economic transaction. Sebaliknya, negara-negara ini juga masih campur tangan kerajaan itu berlaku pada tahap-tahap yang berbeza mengikut negara yang dibincangkan. Okay? An implicit understanding among rulers of great power distribution benefit them mutually. Okay, so this goes back to the role of the leaders. Okay, jadi mereka leaders pun perlulah dipilih leaders yang faham tentang power distribution, politik of international relations, semua tu, in order for balance of power to happen. If let's say you suddenly decided to elect a comedian or actors to be the state's leader, so you're basically putting your country at risk. If let's say they come into politics with zero knowledge on a balance of power. Okay, we have a lot of example track record yang mana negara-negara ini memilih actors, memilih comedian untuk menjadi pemimpin negara mereka. Okay, UK, Soviet, US, Ukraine yang sekarang pun komedian. Jadi banyak isu apabila mereka-mereka ni yang lebih kepada selebriti menjadi political leader, right? Kalau mereka masuk tanpa pengetahuan politik lah, kalau mereka memang politician, that's okay lah. History of balance of power, first European phenomena. We have first golden age of balance of power from 1648 to 1789 This was post the 30 Years' War and Westphalian treaties. And then we have the second gold age of balance of power, the First World War. Yeah, applicability of balance of power among ASEAN countries. That too we will discuss later. Yeah. First golden age of power from 1648 to 1789. Yeah, if you still remember, Westphalian treaties was ratified in 1648 to solve the 30 Years' War issues in Europe. Yeah. So characteristic of international system at that time, religious conflict was reduced because they have 30 Years' War. Okay, if you still remember, the 30 Years' War happened because of religious conflict. And gradually it started to create spillover effect to neighboring areas and eventually led to interstate war. Okay, so at that time, religious institution was very influential in politics pada waktu itu. So bila ada religious conflict, it erupt into a larger scale of interstate war. Okay, so what happened was they realized that they need to stop. Hence, the ratified of Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Only then the Western concept of nation states come to existence. So before that, it's mostly based on monarchy, colonialism strategy, yang mana berdasarkan empire. Okay, but after the Treaty of Westphalia ratified in 1648, the establishment of modern statehood, in which we have international border, effective government, uh, uh, um, territory, population, and recognition. Okay, the five basic characteristic of a state that we discussed in chapter number 1, right? So after the 30 Years' War, absolute monarchy replaced by system of popular sovereignty. So religious institutions started to decrease in popularity. People started to rely more on popular sovereignty, which means based on election, right? In which you know that you need to always perform in order for you to secure your status quo. If not, the people have the right to change you with other candidates in the coming election. And then, after the conclusion of the Westphalian treaties, it helps to create 1648, 1789. I'm not good at maths, tapi about 140 years something lah ya of peace before another conflict erupt in 1789 due to the French Revolution that toppled the monarch and ruled by people. Okay, so at that time it was a consequences of democracy value in which we allow people to topple down ineffective government. Okay, at that time, the people does not see the monarch as representing the people's will. Hence why they initiate the French Revolution. Okay, so wars among nation states was kept limited. Corporate mentality of various aristocracy ruling in European countries, all of which goes down to the Industrial Revolution, right? So what are the challenges? First phase of French Revolution in 1789, in which it increased expansionist military campaign, rise of nationalism, creation of new order by Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, Napoleon Bonaparte yang menjatuhkan institusi beraja di Prancis pada waktu itu, right? And then after that dia mulalah kepada ekspedisi penjajahan, okay, di negara-negara lain dan bergantung penuh kepada elemen nasionalisme pada waktu itu, ya, yang mana mereka melihat itu adalah satu cause for nationalism, okay. So European reaction bind together to defeat Napoleon, like I said, realist assumption about how its natural responses from the states to always make sure that there is no one country can create dominance over the other in the international politics. And that's exactly what happened during that time, where suddenly the other big powers started to form alliances to balance against Napoleon. Okay, so what they did was agreed to restore principle of legitimacy and moderation. Okay, the parties involved at that time were there were four parties, yeah, Britain, Russia, Prussia dan juga Austria. Okay, yang mana keempat-empat negara ni form alliances to balance against Napoleon government at that time, French government at that time. Jadi, what happened was they managed to defeat Napoleon, and ada dua principle here, legitimacy and moderation. For legitimacy, what they did was they restore the monarchy power in in France at that time. Okay, so apa mereka buat? Mereka jatuhkan Napoleon dan mereka restore kuasa negara raja berdaulat di negara Prancis pada waktu itu. Itu legitimacy. Moderation pula adalah macam mana dorang compensate, okay, area-area yang sudah terlepas dari France dengan area-area baru yang mempunyai nilai yang sama. Jadi that's how they secure balance of power itu, yang mana tidaklah berlaku konflik apabila mereka offer balik area yang sama sebelum ni yang dikuasai Prancis ataupun area yang mempunyai nilai yang sama. Okay, so it was called as a concert of Europe at that time. Yeah, Napoleon was eventually defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, agreed in the Congress of Vienna to restore the European balance of power. So Congress of Vienna ni yang dipanggil nama lainnya adalah Concert of Europe. Okay. Function of Congress, first of all, in every Congress, it's about negotiation, and usually they can either come out with a joint communique ataupun joint statement, and the other output usually in the form of treaties, okay, peacemaking treaties and demarcation of boundaries. So inilah yang dia bilang moderation and also legitimacy tu, right? And then management of forced war settlement, the two principle, and crisis management, in which at that time, one of the crisis management from the Congress of Vienna or Concert of Europe adalah menyatakan bahawa the four states in the alliances, Britain, Prussia, Rusia, dan juga Australia, agreed to always in contact whenever crisis occurs. Mereka mempersetujui bahawa sekiranya apa-apa konflik berlaku, mereka akan sentiasa berhubung dan berbincang. So itu crisis management yang dipersetujui pada Congress of Vienna pada waktu itulah. Ada banyak lagi lah sebenarnya, but you can read later, ya. So Great Power Congress, you can see the list there, right? And then we have the second golden age of balance of power, yeah. This one from 1845 to 1914, the First World War, England, France, Prussia, Austria, and Hungary. Okay, so macam mana boleh jadi second golden age of balance of power ni adalah sebab yang tadi tu Congress of Vienna kan ada Austria dalam 4 negara tu kan, lepas tu macam mana berlaku perang tu disebabkan oleh Austria dan I don't remember the other states tidak setuju dengan keputusan alliances. So berlakulah peperangan. Kalau kamu ikut buku sejarah, dia cakap peperangan tu berlaku disebabkan oleh pembunuhan Archduke Franz Ferdinand kan, iaitu putra itu Austria. Tapi sebenarnya kalau mengikut perspektif international relation, pembunuhan itu bukanlah punca sebenar peperangan Perang Dunia Pertama. Sebaliknya, itu hanyalah catalyst. Sebab tension di antara negara-negara Eropah pada waktu itu, tension itu sudah ada lama pun sudah ada ketidakpuashatian itu, tapi tidak ada sebab untuk berperang. Sampailah pembunuhan Archduke Franz Ferdinand itu dijadikan satu sebab supaya mereka berperang. That's why kita lihat itu sebagai satu bentuk katalis sahaja. Tapi kalau rujuk di buku sejarah dicakap itulah punca perang. Okay? And then characteristic of international system, ideologically homogeneous. Okay, war was kept limited, and international law began to flourish. Right. Then, what are the challenges of balance of power in the second phase? Okay, changing nature of the 20th century due to technology and industrialization. Okay, industrial revolution, right? The start of colonial expedition, increased mass nationalism. When industrial revolution happened, nationalism become more apparent. Yeah, it all started back, dated back in the early 20th century, yang mana steamship, okay, allows people to travel further. Satu lagi, supply and demand at domestic level was not sufficient. They need to find other market to penetrate. Jadi all of which lead to imperialism. Okay, yang mana mereka pergi sampai ke Asia untuk mencapai objektif mereka. Okay, under all sort of excuses. Okay, gold glory gospel lah, white superiority lah, democracy lah, all sort of excuses. But at the end of the day, everyone know it all goes back to their goal, national interest attainment. Yeah. And then increase different interests among the ruling elites when they in the position to govern. Usually they become greedy. Okay, so among these ruling elites as well, they compete for power. Okay, so ruling elites is important because they are the one who make decision. So that's why it's very important to choose wisely who become the leader. Okay, these ruling elites, they have big influence towards the decision making. Jadi, who's at the top will make a big difference in regards to international relation approach by that country. Great powers started to concern about their sovereignty, strong national identity, and eruption of World War I and World War II, all of which challenged the balance of power during 1840, between 1845 to 1914, right? Power distribution and world political system. In general, we have three levels: unipolar, which means hegemony achieved, bipolar, and multipolar model. Multipolar model means that balancing happen between more than two parties. Bipolar model means balancing happen between two states, two parties. Unipolar happen when one state manage to create hegemony power over the other countries, right? So this is an example of a multipolar system during the 19th century balance of power. Okay, Great Britain, Austria, France, Prussia, and Russia, all of which balance with one another, right? And then another example is bipolar system during the Cold War era between two blocks, United States and its ally, Canada, France, Israel, Japan, Norway, United Kingdom, West Germany, etc. And then Soviet Union with their satellites, Bulgaria, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, okay, is Germany, Hungary, Poland, Syria, etc. Yeah. So ini adalah bipolar system. Itu ada dua kuasa yang bersaing. And unipolar system post-Cold War era, in which United States as the winner of the Cold War managed to create hegemon power. Okay, so where under unipolar system we only have one superpower, yaitu United States, and the others operates di sekitar United States punya bidang kuasa sebagai kuasa utama. So, the main issues in regards to these three level adalah pertanyaan mana satu yang paling sesuai, yang paling durable dalam membentuk keamanan. So before I answer, I want to ask this dengan kamu. Kamu rasa mana satu yang paling stabil? Multipolar, bipolar, unipolar? Kalau pendapat kamu, mana satu yang paling stabil? Unipolar. Kenapa unipolar, Rahman? Kenapa unipolar, Rahman? Rahman buka mic lah. Sebab kalau unipolar to country dorang kena manage sendiri-sendiri sejak. Jadi balance tu political stability happen when unipolar structure exists. Sebabnya dorang boleh buat suka-suka hati begitu. Dorang boleh manage sendiri-sendiri sejak. Macam tu Karaman. Ya. Kenapa bipolar, Izzuddin? Kenapa bipolar, Izzuddin? Ada si Izzuddin kah? Kenapa bipolar? Yang lain, kamu rasa multipolar, bipolar, unipolar? Sebab orang ada power yang boleh dirujuk. Macam mana dengan yang lain? Nur Syahira Atika. What do you think? Intan lah, Intan. Intan rasa mana satu Intan yang boleh mewujudkan kestabilan yang berpanjangan, sustainable peace? Intan? Bipolar, kenapa Dona bipolar?
Sebab two powers have the same equal power.
Itu je. Okay. In regards to which model can offer more sustainable peace, again, we do not have one definite answer, but I can share with you several arguments offered by scholars. For instance, from Kenneth Waltz, neoclassic realist punya scholars. According to him, the most durable peace usually created out of bipolar model. Okay, because according to him, okay, kejap Intan. Because according to Waltz, as the number of participants increase, so does the uncertainty. Okay, as the number of participants increase, so does the uncertainty, which means unipolar yang paling kurang uncertainty, bipolar adalah sedikit, multipolar paling banyak uncertainty. According to Kenneth Waltz, basing his logic on that particular rule of thumb that I mentioned just now, the most suitable model to create long-lasting peace is bipolar, in the sense that we minimize the number of participants to only two parties, to make sure that uncertainty can be reduced and bad decision can be avoided. Jadi, according to him, semakin banyak parti yang terlibat dalam satu-satu balance of power itu, semakin banyak uncertainty. Jadi yang kita boleh buat adalah mengurangkan bilangan partisipan supaya uncertainty itu juga dapat dikurangkan. Tetapi tidak boleh unipolar. Jadi yang paling bagus according to Kenneth Waltz adalah bipolar model. And then we also have another opposing argument by Kaldouche, in which he said that he actually concur with Kenneth Waltz's argument about how uncertainty increase as the number of participants increase. But according to him, that's good, because when people become more uncertain, when the situation become more uncertain, states become more cautious in their decision making. So according to Deutsch, even though he agreed that the uncertainty increase as the number of participants increase, but it's better for the number of participants to include more parties, so uncertainties can become increased and people become more cautious. Jadi maksud dia, dia setuju dengan Kenneth Waltz yang uncertainty itu akan bertambah dengan pertambahan jumlah peserta. Tapi dia tidak bersetuju yang kita mesti kurangkan uncertainty itu. Menurut Kaldouche, dia cakap, bagus tambahkan lagi uncertainty itu dengan pelbagaikan lagi parti yang terlibat dalam balancing itu, supaya uncertainty ini membuatkan mereka rasa lebih cautious, lebih berhati-hati dalam buat keputusan. Jadi menurut dia, yang paling bagus adalah model multipolar. Tapi for all scholars, they agree yang unipolar ni adalah tidak akan mewujudkan durable peace, because unipolar ni mereka andaikan sebagai temporary. Again, goes back kepada basic argument, iaitu tindak balas respon daripada negara lain secara semula jadi apabila wujud unipolar, mereka akan cepat-cepat balancekan. Jadi menurut mereka, unipolar ini tidak akan berlaku dengan lama, hanya berbentuk temporary. So it will no way can create long lasting peace. Cuma itu yang silap dia di situ, sebab mereka tidak menjangka bahawa selepas Cold War tu, unipolar tu sebenarnya berlaku dalam tempo yang lama sampai sekarang actually, iaitu United States. Cumanya tidak berlaku seperti idea hegemoni yang asal, iaitu mereka akan berbuat suka hati. Sebabnya globalization, okay, dan rising powers. Even though kita ada satu sahaja kuasa unipolar, tapi kita ada rising powers yang membentuk indirect balancing, iaitu China, Russia, India yang juga mempunyai nuclear power. Jadi biarpun US adalah unipolar power, tapi mereka sendiri masih berhati-hati sebab dia punya cost benefit analysis, yang itu kalaupun mereka impose their will, tapi it will cause a lot of disadvantages to their status quo. Jadi yang lebih baik adalah bukannya menggunakan hard power, tapi menggunakan soft power to decrease the possibility of conflict. Okay, so itulah jawapan-jawapan daripada scholars. Kita tidak ada definite answer, tapi mempunyai pelbagai argument yang menyatakan kenapa particular model lebih baik daripada model yang lain. Dan alliances. Okay, what is alliances? A coalition of states that coordinate their action to accomplish some ends. Most alliances are formalized in written treaties, concern a common threat and related issues of international security. For example, during the World War I, we have the Allied versus Central, and World War II between the Axis and Allied. States form alliances to increase their effective power relative, of another states or alliances. The world main alliances, including NATO and US-Japanese alliance, face uncertain role in changing world order. Okay, so when power disparity occurs, how do you make sure that you can create equal distribution of power under such setting? Through alliances, okay, where you convince the other states to join your bloc. Okay, how do you convince them? Goes back to the what we discussed in negotiation ataupun bargaining process just now. It's either based on the carrot and stick ataupun good diplomatic relationship. Okay, to convince them to join your bloc, your camp. So in that way, you can create a new bloc to balance the existing power, right? So that's what it meant by effective power relative. Okay, it's always about equilibrium between competing forces. Okay, so kalau multipolar maksudnya equilibrium dia itu berdasarkan ramai, tapi selalunya yang berlaku adalah bipolar lah yang sekarang ni, the recent one. Okay, so the contemporary alliances that still exist until today, for instance, NATO. Okay, why NATO still exists until today? Because they emerge as the winner against Warsaw Pact, right? So even recently, NATO role as Western Europe security alliances being questioned because of their involvement in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Okay, so from that case only you can see the commitment among the NATO members in regards to Ukraine-Russia conflict. Okay, and US-Japanese alliances, for instance, post the Nagasaki nuclear bombing, ya. So, dorang ada alliances yang mana US janji akan membangunkan Japan semula selepas perang nuklear itu dengan syarat Japan tidak boleh membangunkan ketenteraan mereka. Japan hanya boleh membangunkan ekonomi dan sosial sahajalah. Okay, so alliances ni penting, paling penting sebenarnya adalah untuk negara-negara kecil, right? For countries like Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, alliances ni adalah yang paling penting sebenarnya untuk memastikan survivability kita. Sebab kalau kita terus balance secara direct, kita ada big probability yang kita akan kalah. Jadi kita perlukan alliances ni untuk memastikan kita punya effective power relative to another states or alliances. Okay, the good thing is in Southeast Asian region, our continent, our region usually being viewed as a buffer region. Okay, negara rantau buffer. Jadi whenever issues arise between the big power, Russia, US atau China, they always look at ASEAN countries as neutral country, and it also reflected in ASEAN constitution, right, where they uphold values such as non-interference, CNWFZ, and all that, yang mana menunjukkan neutral stance tu. Jadi Southeast Asian region adalah satu bentuk alliances yang dilihat sebagai buffer yang bersifat tidak memilih pihak. Okay, satu lagi, bila kita cerita pasal balancing ni kan, balance of power, that's not the only foreign policy option. Yeah, balancing is not the only foreign policy option. We have another one called as bandwagon. Okay, bandwagon means that a particular state become more dominant at the international stage. So you bandwagon with the states. Okay, kamu masuk kereta dia, kamu ikut dia punya camp terus. Bukannya balancing against dia. Okay, kalau balancing ni kamu buat satu pakatan baru untuk balance dia. Bandwagon, kamu ikut dia jadi ekor dia begitu. Right? And then ada satu lagi yang tengah-tengah. Okay, which called as hedging. Hedging means you balance and you bandwagon at the same time. So if you ask about Malaysian foreign policy, my answer is Malaysia use hedging policy. We balance and we bandwagon at the same time. Okay, but that one we can discuss more in detail when we start the foreign policy chapter later. Yeah. So alliance, a definition, a close association of nation for achievement of common objective or a group of country united for the purpose of joint military protection. Okay, so alliances ni usually before lah masa waktu Cold War, World War One, World War Two, usually alliances ni berbentuk joint military protection. Tapi sekarang tidaklah hanya terhad kepada military, semua pun dorang sentuh ekonomi and all that. Okay, the formation of an alliances coupled with their own military preparedness was a means to ensure a country's security in the years leading up to World War One. Colonial rivalries lead each country to seek friends, aka defensive alliances for their own protection. So alliances ni pun not something yang happen instantly, ya. Dia perlu ada thorough negotiation process as well. You also want to know what you can benefit from such alliances. Okay, jadi to convince them, you need to offer them something as well. Usually in terms of military protection. Okay, jadi itu adalah dia punya yang basic attracting point dia untuk convince orang join. Tapi sometimes orang juga tambah dia added value, for instance, economic cooperation and whatnot lah, right? When a man makes alliances with the Almighty, giant looks like grasshopper, right? So ini semua adalah quotes lah in regards to alliances. Oh, so itu saja. That's all for this chapter. Chapter number 5 about international security and power. So, any question? Ada soalan?
So far, okay, sir.
Yang lain? Multipolar because they have factor of stability and conflict. Oh, okay. Yang lain macam mana? All clear. So far, no. Right. So, no question. Okay. Jadi, that's all. If there's no question, then saya yang artikel review assignment masih boleh tukar artikel ke saya. I would not suggest you to change your article at the very last minute because you need to do you need to start over again, baca semua balik. Tapi kalau very urgent, then bolehlah tukar. Tapi still due date sama ya. Okay, so saya tidak kisah kamu tukar, cuma due date tidak akan berubah lah. So kamu tukar last minute, I'm just telling you the risk adalah kamu perlu mula semula dari awal. Okay. And make sure kamu tukar artikel tu, betul lah artikel kamu tu. Consult with me first lah. Okay. Ada lagi kah soalan lain? Any other question before we end our session this morning, our class this morning? Right. So if there's nothing else, please go to YouFuture and take your attendance. And I'll see you guys again during the tutorial class. Yeah. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, sir.